Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome back to Wall Street Silver. Joining us today is the professor of chemistry at Cornell University, Dave Collum. Welcome back, sir.
It's always fun to be back. You guys are a hoot.
Thank you.
You are the hoot, Dave. Thank you for joining us. So you're writing your big end of year review. This is something you've sort of become famous for. Writing your end of year review, you do a lot of topics, and one of the topics you told us you're covering is inflation, and how crazy this is, what's happening in the world right now. Give us the gist of what people should be looking for. Well,
so the obvious topic that I'll just touch upon is how it's gotten out of control and how the Fed's battling it, things like that. When I've spent a considerable amount of ink on is this idea of what just 1 or 2 years of inflation, what kind of damage that does. And so if you imagine you are you're some sort of salaried person whose raises go up with inflation. A pharmacist, for example, the first year out of school, they get the same pay as the last year before they retire. So a job like that tracks inflation. And so imagine that you're some young punk in a job, and a handful of years ago, during the great financial crisis, Cornell said, no raises this year. And everyone said, yeah, sure. The way I wrote this, I said, with the faculty having an approximately 4.5 million SAT points, no one noticed how bad that was. And what makes it bad is if you've got, say, 30 years ahead of you and you get, let's say you would have gotten a raise of 3.5% tracking inflation, you get zero. That 3.5% pay cut follows you for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And so the next year you get a normal inflationary raise, you still are down 3.5%. So right. It's the miracles of compounding backwards. So if you do a little math, it comes out to you just got clipped for an entire paycheck, an inflation adjusted paycheck in your career. They just took one of those 30 years of pay away from you by not keeping up with inflation. So then this year, for example, I got a 3.5% raise. Let's, for laughs, just to humor ourselves, pretend like inflation's 8.5%, not some much bigger number. So I lost 5% to inflation. Now I'm 67. So this effect is only going to bird dog me for a couple more years. So it's not a big deal. But now that young punk is down 8.5%. Mm-hmm. And that's going to track them for the rest of their career, unless, of course, all of a sudden the university says, oh, back a couple of years back, we docked you in a sub-inflation performance. This year, we're going to give you the normal inflationary raise plus 8.5%. The odds of that are happening are zero. Yeah. And so, right. So you basically gave it up. And so 8.5%, now we're talking about you just got docked because of 2 years in a row, two different years, you're docked, maybe 2.5 paychecks. Wow. Throughout your career. And by the way, if your assets go down 3%, let's say you're a boomer and your assets go down 3%, you just lost 3% a year for the rest of your retirement on your annual pay.
Yeah, so 401ks are in the toilet right now. All the indexes seems like Apple's the only thing holding up some of the indexes at this point. All the big names in stocks, Facebook has cratered. A lot of big names have cratered. And so your point's well made. The boomers who are near end of for a lot of people don't have a lot of sympathy for the boomers at this point. It's tough to recover. And I think about the Gen X, or not Gen X, the millennials.
The young guys, just the millennials. The young guys, yeah.
I'm Gen X. I'm Gen X, but the millennials are really getting screwed. Look at what's going on with them. They've gone through multiple, the internet bubble, the financial crisis in 2008 with the real estate. Now they've got this one happening again, the third one in their careers.
But here's where they're not so screwed. And that is let's say they behave themselves well. Years ago, I read a U.S. Air magazine. It was the most influential U.S. Air article I ever read. I was very young. I was probably 25, 26 years old, just bought a house, and therefore was cash poor. And because I was paying off a mortgage at 15.5%, finding cash to contribute everything possible into a 401k. So Cornell puts 10%, very generous, actually. Wow. But the article said, are you maxing it out? And the answer is no. And they said, well, if you want to up the amount you put in, just up at 1% a year. And in relatively short order, you'll be putting a lot of money in there. And that's exactly what I did. So I reached a point where I was sheltering 26% of my gross into retirement. And so if you do that during a period where the economy really sucks and the markets suck, you're slowly amassing this like powder keg of savings. And if your last 20 years of where you still have risk assets because you haven't retired, if you rock and roll, all those savings are locked and loaded and then they go. So you really want the boom to be in the second half of your life, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, we've had this huge boom with low interest rates, and it's questionable whether we're going to be able to, look at the Japan economy. Their market is down to flat since the 90s. I mean, so
right, 30.
We've had this golden era for the stock market since the 80s that we may never repeat again.
Well, let me give you my doom story. This is my doom and gloom story. I know that even on my scale, that is a doom and gloom. And some of it I pinched from Murray Stahl of Horizon Connects, others I just kind of put in there. But here's the story. In the early 1980s, miraculous things occurred. That's actually Murray's language right there. The Russians were falling apart. They hadn't yet collapsed, but the Soviet Union was falling apart, and all they had was resources. So they flooded the world with resources. Mm-hmm. The Chinese were coming out of the Middle Ages, basically, and they had nothing. They had no money. You want to know how much no money is? When one of the Chinese guys went to the United Nations as China was coming out, they literally had 38,000 in foreign reserves in the Chinese banking system. Wow. That's how bad they were. All they had to sell was cheap labor. So for the next 4 decades, they sold cheap labor. The boomers were just entering the workforce, and any economist will tell you, whether right or wrong, they'll tell you that demographics is everything. And so the boomers hit the workforce and for the next 4 decades produced. Now we produced some pretty stupid shit like Facebook, but we still produced. Women were entering the workforce, right? And on top of that, interest rates dropped from 16% to essentially zero, all during those 4 decades. So what are the consequences? One is the odds of us repeating that is almost zero. Mm-hmm. I won't say zero, but if I had to round it to the nearest integer, I'd say zero. And I think that allowed the markets to not only climb like crazy over 40 years. So any plot that shows you the last 40 years as they're doing a recency bias. 40 years is a recency bias problem. You got to go back 100 years, then you go, oh, now I understand. I think Murray said the age of monetary policy is over. What I think he's saying is the Fed's out of bullets. What I would say is that the age of the V-bounce is over. And that is at some point, we're not going to just do these flickers to the downside that correct nothing. And then we run off back up the hill like Sisyphus. and I think at some point, those V-bounces are simply going to disappear. And we are going to go into a Nikkei-like market, which I got in an argument with George Noble one day during a Twitter space. I said, markets can be uninvestable. The Nikkei is a perfect example. If you were 1990, and the question is, okay, I got to invest in the Nikkei. How do I do it? There was no way to do it.
Short.
And George said, no, you can't short because it took too many years to get down. It was a slow grind. You would have been ground to dust trying to short the Nikkei. That was George's answer, but that's not correct. Now, the V-bounces are shortable, right? Because you take your profit, you wait till the bottom, wash for the blood in the street, boom, you cover your shorts, that's the bottom, and then boom, back up the other side, works fine. Mm-hmm. The Nikkei didn't offer any of that. Mm-hmm. So I think the global markets, which there are regions that are historically not badly priced, but if you look at, here's a great one, no one knows this, Germany. If you own the German market for the last 23 years, you haven't made a penny.
Wow.
Right? No, the FTSE's up in the last 35 years, something like I just looked at this morning, something like sixfold in 30 years. You're not even tying inflation. So there really are times where there's just nothing to do because the world is grinding off problems.
I think the speculation is just the sheer amount of debt in the system. We might be entering that.
And the buybacks are going to go. The buybacks. I forgot to add the buybacks.
Stock buybacks are going to,
The corporate debt has been soaring since 1994. Corporate debt took off in 1994.
Well, low interest rates,
Yeah, and never looked back. And then buybacks went from being the Peter Lynch buy your company shares because they're cheap to every other CEO saying buy your company shares so my options go up, right? And so now the companies are illiquid. I've seen quotes by some people as high as 40% zombies in the S&P. If there's someone out there who has a list of the S&P zombies, not just the claim that there's 20% or 40%. Jim Grant said 20%. I assume that number's coming from somewhere. Right. That means 100 S&P companies can't pay their interest rates with their cash flow, with interest rates at low levels. That was even before they started hiking the rates. So that's where the 40 might come from. It could be now there's 40 because the rates have doubled. I don't know. But if someone has a list of those companies, I need it. I've been asking people, I get lists of zombies, but supposedly there's 100 zombies in the S&P. That's the list I'm looking for.
So Dave, the other hot story in the news right now is, of course, the whole Paul Pelosi thing, and it's really confusing to a lot of people what narrative to believe right now. There you are. Now you're pretty.
I got my hammer underneath the desk. I'm doing something to myself.
You got a pink hammer?
Yeah. I got a pink hammer, yeah.
All right. So here, there's been a lot of speculation, and we love to speculate on what the true story is because the media seems to be trying to confuse this one intentionally. This is a very confusing picture to a lot of people. This is, Paul Pelosi's house. The story is that some guy at 2 a.m. came and broke in and was looking
in his underwear, and
we came in looking for Nancy, and the media would have us believe it was some right-wing nut, and this is all because of Trump. It's all Trump's fault. Walk us through the problem with this picture.
Well, for starters, the glass is on the outside, not the inside. Second of all, it looks like it was a break the glass and reach in and open the windows, but where he broke the glass and the doors that are open would require Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to reach the knobs. And so that looks like it was staged after the fact. The story here is actually quite simple. Paul Pelosi has a drinking problem and he's a perv. And Nancy can't keep him in check. And this is a no-brainer. And this would be a non-story, in my opinion.
You retweeted this summary of what might have happened.
Which I pretty much nails it.
Well, the media would have us believe that this nudist woke up at 2 a.m. on Friday morning, decided to create some websites and do a bunch of, right-wing stuff on the website
with BLM on his trailer back at his house.
Yeah. So he staged a couple websites right before he did this. Stripped down to his underwear, grabbed a hammer, and jogged all the way to Nancy's house. Here's what I can't believe. She is second in line, only after the vice president. She is the next one after the vice president to take over. If there were a problem, she's second in line for the presidency. I cannot believe there are not security cameras everywhere. And even her husband, even if she was not in town, her husband would have round-the-clock security.
Well, they're stinking rich too, so even if they needed to pay for it privately, they would. So, but now that this story, I mean, Paul just keeps getting in trouble. This is like them trying to explain Hunter not being a crackhead, right? It's kind of that level of stupid. And if they had just said, Paul's a bit of a perv, I let him do what he does, let's move on, it would have gone away, right?
Yeah, Paul goes to the bars, to the gay bars in San Francisco. It's just something he does, and it doesn't bother me.
And it pisses me off, but let's talk about those Republicans. Now, here's what pisses me off is that every time they get some story, they blame white supremacists, and I am getting pretty goddamn pissed off at that storyline.
But Dave, they weren't talking to you, Dave. Not you.
They are talking to me, though. They are talking to me because they're blaming anyone who is a right winger. They're painting the right with a big brush, and it's so divisive. So when Biden got elected, he'd pivot to the middle, and then at least we'd have this daffy bastard who stood up and in semi-coherent ways said the world was great, and instead he's turned into this neo-Nazi and or Stalinist or whatever you want to call them. They're all the same. They're just badasses, and I'm just so dismayed. And every chance, the January 6 hearings, those were Stalin-Lenin show trials. There was no effort to get truth. There was nothing. The left, to me, and I'm not talking the people who vote from the left. I'm talking about the left leadership. They are a bunch of authoritarians. They are driving me nuts. Give me 10 minutes alone with them with a pink hammer, and I'd bash their heads in, and they could then tell the story. It's just crazy, the shit that they're doing. I am getting tired of being called a white supremacist.
Where does it end, Dave?
Well,
I have to get some tattoos and join a militia. That's where it ends.
There
we go. Yeah.
There have been a lot of funny memes that have come out of this that
But none of this story is ambiguous.
Yeah.
The only thing that's ambiguous is why the press, who are bought and paid for, why they didn't just say no, we're not defending this one.
Yeah.
But they are. They are. You're a bunch of whores, ladies and gentlemen. You've joined the oldest profession. You're paid to lie. You're paid to lift up your skirts. You're paid to do things. Where is Dan Rather? Who's a lefty? Where is Peter Jennings? Where is Edward R. Murrow? They're gone.
Yeah.
And this is what bothers me to no end. The media was given special constitutional protections. They have responsibilities. There we go, Jussie Smollett. This juicy Smollett.
Juicy Smollett.
And so the media is abrogating their responsibility, with the exception of the independent media, guys like Greenwald and Taibbi and stuff like that, who are both super lefties. Right. But are trying to get it right. If you try to get it right, I don't give a damn which direction you leave. If you're trying to get it right, you'll be fine.
And so you're big on Twitter. I know you've got close to 100,000 followers on Twitter. And so this huge change that's happened in the past week is Elon seems to have relaxed the censorship dramatically on Twitter, even to the point where he felt the need to chime in on the whole Paul Pelosi thing. And he I called it it wasn't really a fact check like I called it here, but the fact that Elon, I grabbed a screenshot because I thought he'd probably end up deleting this, but I grabbed it when it was only at 18 minutes old. He ended up deleting this later when it got to 110,000 likes later and was dominant. But the fact that Elon would go and respond to Hillary and say this, something's changed on Twitter in the past week. I mean, it's more of a free-for-all. The boundaries are much wider now in terms of what we're allowed to say on Twitter. Would you agree?
Well, so when he finally consummated the deal, which sounds dirty, tweeters started getting bolder also. So there were people who started tweeting things like "learn to code," and they're going, "Okay, let's test this out." They were starting to talk about vaccines.
It's like a teenager figuring out their boundaries, right?
That's exactly right. Or like the raptors in Jurassic Park, testing the boundary of the containment thing. And so people started just posting stuff just to see what happens. The fact you can get off Twitter telling someone to learn to code is an extraordinary bit of censorship, right? So yes, Twitter's gone looser. I actually don't have a problem with the idea that it's not a completely wildly free speech oriented thing. I do think that boundaries that are carefully monitored and very, very sort of on the far edge of society's limits are fine, right? I think you could say things on Twitter that are not acceptable. I don't think free speech means you get to say absolutely anything you want. It's like the Alex Jones lawsuit, right?
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
I can live with the idea that he somehow was so persistent, which I don't know how persistent he was, but the Sandy Hook story, that he somehow was so persistent that you could make the case that he caused harm. I could imagine that case being made, even though free speech would say, no, you can't make that case. I can't make the case for $1 billion.
Right.
I can make the case for here's $1 million a piece. Sorry, he's now paid, but I don't think that'll hold up in court either. I think a judge will overturn that fast. There's just nothing sane about that.
So, Elon is being accused of being, also a tool of the right wing at this point. I guess the left wing is upset that they don't dominate the field anymore. A lot of the executives who used to align with the left have been terminated now. And Elon, just the fact that he brought it back to the middle, he's being accused of being a white supremacist Nazi or whatever, or right wing, Trump lover, MAGA loving. Although a lot of us are just viewing this as he's just brought things back to the middle and allowed both sides to have a discussion.
Exactly.
Do you find it unreasonable how the left is portraying Elon's new management style of Twitter?
That's a rhetorical question.
I already know the answer. I'm trying to set you up.
You tee it up. We're playing t-ball now. Okay, I got it. So the left, they're the repugnant left, right? And I didn't used to think of the left as repugnant. I used to think they suffered from sort of an overdose of utopianism, an overdose of idealism, a lack of realism. And the right were a bunch of harsh bastards who were more realistic, and they kind of played their respective roles and balanced up the system. The left now is a bunch of neo-Nazi Stalinists, best I can tell. And they're just awful. That Atlantic Monthly woman who said, can't we just all get along? She wrote an article saying, we have to get by this COVID thing and all the mistakes and forgive each other. Boy, did she get annihilated. There's a lot of mad people out there now. So yeah, she got annihilated. I read it and didn't like it, but it went way past that. And some guy did a tweet storm that just said, I lost my, we forgive you for causing me to lose my job and getting vaccinated and getting Bell's palsy, and we forgive you for firing us, and we forgive you. He just went on and on. He annihilated her. Wow. And then it's gone rabid. So I was actually going to send her an email and say, look, now what you have to do is just batten down the hatches. Stop watching social media, just shut up, don't apologize, and it'll all quiet down. I was going to send her an email telling her to do that because I have kind of been there, so I know what it's like. So the left, there's a book that everyone should read. There's a bunch of books everyone should read, of course. I think it was Thoreau said you got to read the good ones first because you won't have time to read all the books. And the one that I read that really was kind of worldview changing was one written by Eric Hoffer in 1953 called The True Believer. And it's about mass movements. And to me, it's just brilliant. I was reading this 50-year-old book, 70-year-old book, and it was like he was talking about what we're seeing today. It was just perfect about these mass movements, whether it's climate change, whether it's politics, whether it's MAGA on the left and Antifa on the right. It just, and he was explaining where they get their oxygen from and what fuels them and who the people are. He's not very flattering. He says that the people who are the fanatics who really drive the movement are people who have very low self-esteem, and they're looking for some way to elevate themselves. So they tie themselves to the wagon of this movement that not only elevates them, but also allows them to say, my wretched life is not my fault. It's someone else's fault. And I'm going to be in the campaign to fix it. And they tend to be serial. They tend to be serial joiners. And so if you take away the math, it even says when they're ripe, you don't know what the movement's going to be, but they will attach to it. And so when you have a bunch of people who are down and out, which is what wealth inequality is all about, you are ripe for mass movement. So Eric Hoffer's The True Believer. It's a very short book. It just completely explained the world to me. It was recommended to me by a private equity guy, and I had about a 2-hour talk with. So do that. What you're seeing is mass movements. I go around campus. I see 20-year-old kids with masks on. Why do you have a mask on? They don't work.
Right.
A, they don't work. B, you're not going to get sick or a cold. Right?
When you see them wearing a mask in a car.
Yeah. And then with a Biden bumper sticker, and you say, yeah, I know.
You're wild to talk to. I love it. You've got your end of year review coming out soon. What is that on your website somewhere, or how do you deliver that out?
So last year it came out in 3 parts because I had this theme I had to write. Ended up being, someone told me this. They printed it out 319 pages. But normally I write what I can and then I upload it. Last year I had a plot and I had to finish the plot. It was a combination of COVID and rising authoritarianism, and nothing could be cut short. And so it ended up getting uploaded 3 parts, which is a horrible way to do it. And the last one, a year in review in late January, horrible way to do it, right? But I was so depressed at the end of writing it that I sent it to nobody. I literally didn't distribute it, but my followers found it. I got emails from very famous guys saying, hey, you didn't send it to me. I go, yeah, I was too depressed. I had one famous Swiss money manager say to me, you should stop writing it. It's obviously taking too much out of you. I had another exceedingly famous hedge fund manager who many who know me might know who it is, said, you have to write it. You have to write it. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I would write it again this year. And I'll try to upload it around December 20th or something. I was also a little miffed at the new web manager. He was in no rush to get the pieces uploaded. And I'm going, dude, the clock is ticking on this thing. So I think that also depressed me. So in any event, it'll go up this year. A lot of Ukrainian crap.
Well, send me the link and I'll tweet it. I'll retweet you when you've got it, and I'll blast it.
I will send you the link.
Well, thank you very much. And we'll talk to you again in a few months, sir.
You bet.